Honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Serge Garcia, and I have the honor to chair the Fisheries Expert Group of the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management. My task today is to briefly present the category of conservation areas usually referred to as Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measures, or OECMs, and their potential role in an ecosystem approach to implementation of the UN FSA. Aichi Target 11 on conservation areas coverage, adopted by CBD COP in 2010, stated that by 2020, at least 10% of coastal and marine areas, especially areas of particular importance for biodiversity and ecosystem services, are conserved through effectively and equitably managed, ecologically representative and well-connected systems of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, integrated in the wider landscapes and seascapes. OECMs were not defined at the time, but were intended to include a broad range of areas with significant conservation properties, but not recognized yet as MPAs. OECMs are also mentioned under Target 3 of the draft post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework of the CBD. But what is an OECM? In 2018, the CBD COP14 clarified the concept of OECM and provided a definition and voluntary guidance. The definition states that an OECM is a geographically defined area, other than a protected area, which is governed and managed in ways that achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for the in situ conservation of biodiversity, with associated ecosystem functions and services and, where applicable, cultural, spiritual, socioeconomic, and other locally relevant values. Fishery OECMs are area-based fishery management measures that have been found to meet the CBD definition and criteria, independently of whether or not biodiversity conservation is their primary objective. Few countries have really started the OECM identification process. Canada in North America, Morocco and Algeria in Africa, and the Philippines in the Asia-Pacific area. 192 OECMs have already been registered and are as marine OECMs, but very few of them are fishery-related OECMs. The 34th FAO Committee on Fisheries noted the potential of OECMs for achieving international conservation targets and requested FAO to produce practical guidelines for the fishery sector. Meetings of OECMs for the marine capture fishery sector have been organized at the global level, 2019 by FAO, CBD and the Fisheries Expert Group, in the North Atlantic in 2020 by ICES and the Fisheries Expert Group, in the Mediterranean in 2021 by FAO and GFCM, in the Baltic Sea in 2021 also by HELCOM and FAO, and in the wider Caribbean in 2022 by CBD, FAO and the Fisheries Expert Group. These meetings did not aim to assess OECMs, but to improve understanding of available guidance and capacity building needs. The examples of ABCM considered in these meetings were located within EEZs, or they were transboundary, or they were entirely in the high sea under the NEAFC, NAFO, or GFCM jurisdictions. Further regional initiatives are being planned by FAO in the Indian Ocean and West Africa, as well as in Argentina and Uruguay. To our knowledge, no RFMO has registered an OECM yet. Let me present two examples of potential OECMs of relevance in international waters. First, the NEAFC Rockall ad hoc box is a conventional fishery closure intended to protect the ad hoc resources from overfishing, but de facto protecting many endangered species, deep sea species, and pristine habitats, including some seamounts. Its assessment and management involved NEAFC, UK, and the EU. The ad hoc box is surrounded by NEAFC VMEs, closures, that might be considered also as potential OECMs. It's also surrounded by OSPAR MPAs, stressing the importance and jurisdictional complexity of the whole area. Fortunately, ICES is a common institution for fisheries and environmental assessments in the region. GFCM has established fisheries restricted areas, or FRAs, to protect marine resource essential habitats, vulnerable species and ecosystems, both in EEZs and in the high sea. In 2005, GFCM closed the entire Mediterranean to trawling and dredging at depths below 1,000 meters. The area is shown in brown on the map. A large proportion of that area is in international waters. In 2012, in order to protect coastal sharks and rays, coastal benthic communities, and Posidonia meadows, GFCM decided to prohibit also trawling in the whole Mediterranean within 3 nautical miles from the coast or down to the 50-meter isoband. In doing so, GFCM may have de facto created the largest fishery closures on Earth. In 2021, an FAO workshop on OECM suggested that the huge deep water fishery closure is probably too large and too complex in terms of social, economic, and jurisdictional conditions to be assessed and managed effectively as a single fishery OECM. However, within these very large areas, many specific areas showed on the map may well be good potential OECMs to be implemented under the coordinated management of the coastal state and of the GFCM. In fact, the Yamuka Pomo pit in the Adriatic Sea may be the first fishery closure to be examined by GFCM for this purpose. Many more examples of potential OECMs have been examined by the various working groups already held. Together, they illustrate the potential range of OECMs from fairly small vulnerable marine ecosystems to large conventional fishery closures with complex jurisdiction like the Rockall haddock box, and to a Mediterranean-wide and utterly complex deep sea closure in the Mediterranean. Abundant guidance is already available in the CBD decision itself. The general guidance elaborated by the IUCN WCPA and the specific guidance available on capture fisheries elaborated through different collaborations between IUCN, the Fisheries Expert Group, CBD, FAO, and ICES. The UN FSA and the CBD, within their distinct scope and mandates, share the objective of long-term conservation and sustainable use of fishery resources and biodiversity. Both the CBD in its Article 8 and the UN FSA in its Article 5 share a concern for a broad range of biodiversity attributes, including target and non-target species, dependent and associated species, endangered species, and habitats. The ecosystem approach adopted by the CBD and translated by FAO in 2003 in the ecosystem approach to fisheries has been adopted by all RFMOs, and many of them use area-based management measures as part of their ecosystem approach. The identification and use of OECMs would concretely illustrate and possibly reinforce the implementation of the ecosystem approach to fisheries. As a consequence, RFMO's members may decide to identify OECMs in the area of competence within existing closures or creating new ones. It's important to note that in line with the UN FSA and the Article 8.4, such management measures will apply to all vessels operating in the area. OECMs represent a golden opportunity for the fishery sector in ABNG to strengthen the operationalization of the ecosystem approach to fisheries by RFMOs using OECMs, in close collaboration with regional seas organizations. OECMs may also enhance the conservation outcomes of existing and new fishery closures, as well as the dialogue on biodiversity conservation and fisheries. They could contribute significantly to the global conservation targets of SDGs and to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And FMOs may be able to implement fishery OECMs with little additional work, for instance using VMEs as low-hanging fruits. And OECMs may also facilitate eco-labeling. The BBNG agreement may strengthen the use or area-based management tools like MPAs and OECMs in ABNG. The implementation of OECMs in ABNG raises also several conceptual challenges regarding, for example, the depth and importance of the water column for biodiversity and the potential need to consider multi-layered OECMs and the implication for vertical and horizontal connectivity and enforcement. For highly migratory species with very extended life cycles, there may be a need to consider functional networks of OECMs for a more effective and coherent sustainable use. The obvious need to integrate spatial and non-spatial management measures is already being faced for conventional fishery closures and should not be a major problem with OECMs. The integration of OECMs and MPAs in regional conservation networks through improved collaboration between fisheries and environmental institutions may be facilitated by the coming BBNG agreement. It is becoming clear also that for effective protection of biodiversity and to adapt their management to natural and human-induced climate change, the use of mobile OECMs will need to be considered. The developing surveying and communication technologies should facilitate the transition to more dynamic conservation and fisheries management if historical rigidities could be overcome. OECMs also raise a number of operational challenges, often in both areas under and beyond national jurisdiction. For example, there is a need to coordinate the management of transboundary OECMs under the principle of compatibility to effectively protect shared Australian stocks and habitats. Providing a solid evidence of the additional biodiversity benefits produced by OECMs and the establishment of the causal relationship are not easy. This recurrent assessment of OECM performance may require additional resources, but all RFMOs are already assessed for overall performance. The additional burden will depend on the present capacity and on the number of OECMs, and species and ecosystems involved. The ecosystem approach to fisheries is already adopted by all RFMOs, but the implementation is often considered too slow. OECMs may indeed help to operationalize it further. As mentioned in the preceding slide, the cooperation between RFMOs and the regional fisheries organizations might be improved, following the example given by NEAFC and OSPAR in the Atlantic and by the GFCM and the Barcelona Convention in the Mediterranean. The best way for RFMOs and their states to report to CBD and WCMC on OECMs should be clarified. Finally, the use of OECMs in industrial fisheries, for example as no trawling areas, needs to be seriously considered, as most high sea fisheries are industrial. It must be remembered that in that respect, that the decision 14.8 suggests specifically to identify and prioritize the sectors most responsible for habitat fragmentation, including fisheries, to engage them in developing strategies for mitigating the impact on protected areas and protected area networks, including OECMs. This is in the Annex 1 of the decision. In conclusion, therefore, under the UN Fish Stock Agreement, RFMO seems to be potentially prepared to identify and use OECMs if they so wish, with some additional technical and institutional capacity building. I thank you very much for your attention.